right, let's go ahead and make it official. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by Pressbooks, Exploring the Power of Adaptation in Open Education. We are, well, first off, thank you for joining us today. We're excited to see a warm response to this topic, and we know that there's a lot of global relevance to the open education movement happening all over. My name is Julie Curtis. I'm Vice President of Growth and Strategy for Pressbooks. I'm joined today by Apurva Ashok, Executive Director of the Rebus Foundation, along with three of the faculty creators from the ROTEL Project, Remixing Open Textbooks with an Equity Lens. So we have Joan Giovannini, Mandy Simons, and Keisha Tracy. So you'll be hearing from all of them shortly. Pressbooks and the Rebus Foundation have been privileged to support the ROTEL project since its inception, and we're really excited to share with you some of the awesome work that are coming out of that initiative. As we get started, a quick, let's see. I guess this is the slide I was supposed to show when I was telling you who was on. So here we go. A quick housekeeping note. So feel free to use the Zoom chat as you're doing to introduce yourself. You can share comments and questions directed to the full audience there as well. We know that this tends to be a lively discussion place. If you have questions specifically for the panelists, there will be an open Q&A portion. So we'd love to have you include or add those in the Zoom Q&A function to help us make sure that we're tracking those. So we will be watching both areas, but the Q&A will help us make sure we're not missing questions that are directed to the panel. So thank you for that. Okay, the next thing, we'd love to get just a quick sense of who's joining us and how you're coming into our conversation about open education. We have a very quick Menti poll. We're just looking for where are you joining us from. You can tell us a country, a state, a city, any information you'd like to share on your location. We'd also like to know your primary role. You can select multiple if you wear multiple hats, just so you can just tell us what it is you do, what brings you here. And then also we'd love to know your experience level with open education. So I'm going to take a moment and we'll look at the results here as they come in. The QR code is here on the screen as well. All right, we're starting to get some responses in. So Canada is representing. Glad to have you here. All right, Wisconsin. I'm coming from the Portland, Oregon area, so it's nice to see I've got some fellow Oregonians here. Idaho, Virginia, Texas, Louisiana, Massachusetts, more Idaho, North Dakota. Lots and lots of Canada. That's awesome. Okay, this looks good. Thank you. We'll go to our next slide. Okay, so looking at different roles. So we see a lot of educators, librarians, publishers, some instructional designers, a few administrators, and a few others. So it's good to see the range of hats that folks are wearing coming to us here. All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. And experience level with open education. So we've got a good range here. So we've got a few brand new and novice people. We've got a fair number who are saying, I'm intermediate, I've got some good background. And then we've got at least a couple of people who are at that ninja expert level. So we're glad to have you all here. Thank you for sharing that context with us. Okay, so back to our slides. All right, I wanted to start with just a couple of definitions to make sure that we're all speaking the same language as we're here, especially since we do have a couple of people who are earlier in their learning curve and their journey. So open education refers to a worldwide movement around using resources and tools and practices that use a framework of open sharing And the focus, of course, is to improve educational access and effectiveness globally. And we're glad to have some global representation here today. Open educational resources is a term that refers to teaching, learning, and research materials that are freely available and include permissions to be used and distributed and modified by others. So, I wanted, as we're going to be talking about adaptation, I want to take a moment and just dive into those permissions for a minute. This is what makes OER so different and powerful as learning materials. So often we talk about this set of rights and permissions that make OER unique as the 5 Rs. So unlike traditional textbooks or traditional learning materials, with OER, you can make and retain your own copy of an OER. So that's the R of retain. You can reuse that content in a variety of ways, like in a class, you can post it to a website, you can use it in a study guide. So lots of ways you can reuse it. You can revise the materials, you can add updates, you can translate, you can do a variety of things. That's what we're going to be talking about with adaptation today. You can remix the learning resource with other open content to create something that's totally new, or your own original content and make it something new and different. And then also you have the ability to redistribute or share that work along with any derivative works that you've created. So these permissions allow effectively anyone can iterate and improve learning materials that have open licensing. And it makes it, so we can talk about this notion of a superpower. So adaptation is a superpower that comes directly out of the 5 Rs because of the flexibility that lends to learning resources. So adaptation allows us to take an open textbook or some other resource and turn it into a better fit for a context, an audience, an interdisciplinary setting, or some other educational need. So I realize I'm aging myself a little bit with this question, but you can give us like thumbs up, or in the chat. How many of you remember the Wonder Twins from the Super Friends Saturday morning cartoons? Good. I'm glad that there are a few in my panelists who do remember, and it's okay, Apurva, that you don't remember that. The Wonder Twins are these superhero siblings. And by the way, I'm a twin mom. I'm a parent of twins, so I have that special place in my heart for the Wonder Twins. They turn themselves into different objects in order to fight crime or do other kinds of superhero problem solving. They activate their powers by touching their fists and saying, Wonder Twin powers activate. And then, so whoops, Jaina, the girl twin, can transform into any animal, and Zan, the boy twin, can turn into water in any state, like an iceberg or a tidal wave or, whatever. So the parallel to open educational resources here in adaptation. So like the Wonder Twins, the 5 Rs and OER allow us to transform learning materials into different forms or different states that can get the job of education done better. So I suspect that we'll hear today that adapting OER isn't quite as simple as touching your fists and saying, Wonder Twin powers or open education powers activate. It takes a little more work than that. But what we are going to see is how impressive and impactful the results of adaptation can be in this context. So very quickly, we have at Pressbooks a really unique opportunity to see tangibly what adaptation looks like over time. So these are 2 of the books. Here are the original books, the OER Starter Kit that Abby Elder published back in 2019 at Iowa State University, and iterations that it has taken. And this is just a few. There are many. In fact, there might be like a minority of people who have not at some point at their institution created their own version of an OER starter kit and used some of Abby's original work. And so you can see how it can be copied and cloned and adapted and remixed and localized for different contexts. Similarly, there's a technical writing book that was published out of Open Oregon Educational Resources in 2017 that has continued to evolve and get updated and localized and adjusted. And so these are just 2 examples of where we see that life cycle evolving of OER to continually make it relevant and valuable for different audiences. So one more quick note about adaptation is that there's not one single way to do it. It isn't one size fits all. So we're going to see different models of adaptation today from the ROTEL panelists. It can mean a very light adjustment to an existing OER, like changing around the order or localizing images or adding case studies from your community or interactive activities. Or it could mean reworking something more fundamental from its foundations, like rethinking the learning objectives or the voices or the perspectives or the audiences, or even the whole educational experience that you want to provide, and doing some fundamental shifting based on that. So we're going to showcase today a variety of ways that adaptation can lead to richer and more impactful learning materials that are designed expressly for learners and contexts and educational problem solving. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to turn it over first to Keisha. Would you give us a little bit of background about the ROTEL project and its goals?
Absolutely, I would love to. Hello, everybody. I am Keisha Tracy, as was announced. I am a professor of English Studies at Fitchburg State University, as well as the chair of the General Education Program area, and a proud member of the ROTEL Project. I'm always very excited to talk about it. The ROTEL, as Julie mentioned before, does stand for Remixing Open Textbooks with an Equity Lens, which is a bit of a mouthful to say. So we had the handy dandy acronym. The ROTEL project is a Department of Education federally funded grant. It was for 3 years. Um, I think a little over $1 million, if I remember correctly. And the those it was basically in three phases, which is that the faculty that were involved in a different kinds of professional development. We'll hear from Apurva here in a little bit about that, as well as um, accessibility, professional development, DEI development, and other things of that nature. And then that worked into the writing phases of the project. And then there's the publishing phase, and then the assessment phase, which is essentially what we're in right now. So the faculty support for this, which I always like to highlight because I think it's very important to incorporate that into any of these types of projects, and the ROTEL project did it very well. So there was faculty support in terms of stipends and in terms of the training that I was just talking about, and in terms of the publication. So one of the co-PIs, Dr. Bob Awkward, loves to say that there was an epiphany during the middle of the project for those who were in charge, that it would become a publishing company with wraparound services that were really necessary for faculty to have, in terms of, when, do we have the time to be able to become an expert in all of the parts that goes into the publication of this, all of that sort of thing. Give a shout out to Min, who is, I saw was on the list was list of people here who did amazing work for all of us, as I'm sure my other panelists can say. And so those wraparound services were really kind of an aha moment of what was necessary for this type of project. There were different types of OER resources that were created and promoted. So creation, adaptation, and adoption. So the creation stipends were $5,000, adaptation stipends were $3,000, and adoption have been $500. And those have been a little bit later, and the project decided to focus a lot on adoption of the materials that were created during this project. During when they were looking for proposals and everything, they were targeting a specific types of courses. One of those is general education courses, which have a lot of students in them and can also be used in adaptation quite easily, in the sense of being able to move from course to course, from the university to university, institution to institution. The other target were high demand professional program courses. Those courses typically have very expensive books for them. And so this was one of the reasons that those were targeted as well. So criminal justice, computer science, those types of courses that have high demand in the professional market. And the QR code that you see over there takes you to that link that is underneath, which is the entire ROTEL project and the catalog. Julie, if you could go forward. So this is, I'm not going to go through these word by word, but these are the ROTEL project stated goals. And you'll see that, just like the title suggests, there was a definite emphasis on developing accessible, intentionally inclusive OER that reflects students' local and lived experiences. That local is really an interesting part of it because OER can really be helpful for that. And Julie's slide about adaptation emphasized the fact that you can change out things in OER depending on where you are. So a very important one is there. Improving student learning outcomes, working on scalability, especially at the state level, and then promotion of those works, and of course, cost savings for students, which is number one on the list for almost any OER project. And then, of course, the adoption of ROTEL textbooks encouraged. If you would click one more time, Julie. The results of this was 27 teaching and learning materials. Most of these were full books. But we say teaching and learning materials because we did have banks of questions that were created that had an inclusive side to them so they could be used in, say, mathematics courses and that sort of thing. But most of these were full teaching books, and I believe it's 12 of those were in STEM, which are those are usually the books that have the highest cost to them. So we're very proud of that fact that many of them are STEM projects as well. Okay, back to you, Julie.
Thank you, Keisha. Now we're going to hear from a moment from Apurva about the the Rebus Foundation. And could you tell us a little bit about how it supported the ROTEL project and authors and creative teams?
Sure. Thank you so much, Keisha, for the initial sort of context. I think as Julie, you were describing with the Wonder Twin, that activation energy required to complete an OER adaptation is not low. Producing a high quality learning resource for any discipline, whether it's criminology, biology, even early childhood education, it takes a lot of time, expertise, and collaboration. And that's where Rebus came in. For those of you who are not familiar with Rebus, we are a Canadian registered charity. We offer all kinds of professional development courses and services to help folks along the open publishing journey. I'm actually joining you today from Toronto, and I wanted to acknowledge that I am based on the traditional territories here of the Mississaugas of the First Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I'm really grateful to be able to, live on this land, teach on this land, also learn from it, and join you all here today. Rebus not only works out of Toronto, based here in Canada, but we've had the privilege of supporting the ROTEL Project over the past 3 years. And we've come to this work asking a few different things. How can someone like Keisha, Mandy, Joan get access to the skills they need to remix those textbooks? Julie earlier on showed you a whole list of different kinds of pedagogical elements someone might want to include in an adapted textbook, whether it's just changing the learning objectives or coming up with some engaging interactives. How do you get the skill set to do this work? What does coordination look like if you're participating with colleagues from 5 or 6 different institutions? What does it look like once those resources are published? If you're getting feedback from students after one semester, how do you make those changes? And how can you weave in community and celebration into the process so it's not just a long checklist of items to complete and deadlines associated with them, but it's actually something fun? So we, if you want to go ahead to the next slide, Julie, at Rebus delivered a certificate program called the Open Publishing Project Certificate. It was formerly called the Textbook Success Program. So if some of you have seen the curriculum back in the day, we just changed the name. We ran 5 cohorts of the OPC, where we had over 70 participants join us for 12 months of instruction and support. And as Keisha said, that led to 27 different books being published. We ran sessions around discoverability, on scoping, on editing, storytelling, formatting, and really encouraged people to come together to have group conversations with their cohort where they were able to learn about these topics and learn from experienced alumni facilitators who had produced OER, but they also had the opportunity to have one-on-one meetings with the facilitator and really dissect the issues and challenges that their particular disciplines and adaptation projects might have been facing. We hope that the OPC allowed people to reflect more deeply on the kinds of learning materials they were putting together, the activities and the decisions they were choosing, and really think about what success means. What does student success look like? What does joy in instruction look like? If you want to go ahead to the next slide, Julie. The hope really of providing a professional development program was to not only upskill educators, but give them a chance to get unstuck, because 12 months of creation can lead to all kinds of challenges and issues. So on the slide here, you're seeing a quote from one of the ROTEL and OPC alumni, Yvonne Anthony. And on the next slide, you'll see a photo from a community celebration. So we also made sure to weave community and celebrating back into our project. Last year, we had the privilege of connecting at the Northern Essex Community College, and Sue Tashin, who's on the call right now, organized a lovely reflection panel. So we heard from Joan, Keisha, and a few others. And we're really happy that we got a chance to not only focus on the skills and the expertise needed to do the work, but to celebrate the milestones along the way. So with that, I'll pass it back to Julie, and maybe we can hear from some of the others.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly what we're going to do next. So we want to hear from the ROTEL project teams. Excuse me. Apologies for that. So the prompt that we asked each of our panelists to address today is this. So briefly introduce yourself, your OER project, and why adaptation was the right fit for your project. So tell us about the new resource that you were trying to create. So we're going to go in the order, first Joan, then Mandy, and then Keisha. So I can go ahead and drive for you and just let me know when you want to move forward. Go ahead, Joan.
Thanks, Julie. Hi, everyone. My name is Joan Giovannini, and you are looking at the cover of my adapted OER textbook, Children, Families, Schools, and Communities. And this is adapted from a textbook by the same name from the College of the Canyons. And so, Julie, I loved your little life cycle of the OER slide, and I would love to see that for the College of the Canyons textbook, because it's quite foundational to Intro to Child and Family Studies OER texts and works like this. So I wrote this with the ROTEL grant when I was a full-time faculty member at Holyoke Community College, where I continued to adjunct and continue to use this particular textbook. It's for a course, Education 1 to 13. And the students who take this course, by and large, are already working in the field of early childhood education, or are thinking about going into roles like out-of-school time providers, or guidance counselors, or adjustment counselors, or other areas of education that are supportive to children and families that might not be directly about teaching. This particular course counts in certification for the Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care for folks who are seeking director status. So my students, by and large, are coming already with some professional experiences and life opportunities to draw from and apply to this course. Julie, if you would go to the next slide. I loved this question of like, what are the whys? Why did we want to do this? The College of the Canyons textbook served me well for about 2 years. And what I found was that I was starting to supplement here and supplement there and localize here and localize there. And so when the ROTEL opportunity came up to adapt, I said, yeah, this sounds perfect. And one of my primary drivers was looking at the word family as it's defined in the US Census Bureau, as presented in the College of the Canyons textbook, and really wanting to widen that scope and widen that understanding and diversify that understanding and look at it from a sociological lens. And so these are 2 quotes from chapter 1 of my textbook, and I'll read the second part that's highlighted, which is that the individual is at the center of the relationship and their family is self-defined based on their own social and cultural criteria. And so this creates the framework for the course and the framework for my textbook. If you go to the next slide, Julie. Much of this course, what makes this so fun is that I teach it from an open pedagogical perspective. So not only am I using this textbook, but I'm inviting my students to do this advocacy project, but also to contribute to the textbook. So version 1 of my textbook was me adapting College of the Canyons in 2022. In 2024, version 2 was about me integrating the work of my students. And so if you take a peek at the book, you'll see their contributions in their case studies. We've written big chunks of chapters with me. That was really pretty exciting. And there's more to come, likely in my next version, where I hope that there'll be a chapter added that's a joint contribution from many of my students. So that's me, and I'm glad you're all here.
Thank you so much. All right, Mandy.
Great. Hi, my name is Mandy Simons. I am a professor and chair of biology at Framingham State. And these days, my primary teaching assignment tends to be genetics. So we teach genetics at a pretty intro level. It's a sophomore level course. And during pandemic times, it became very obvious that especially when students were sent home and they were working from home, a lot of students just didn't have access to the textbook. As a STEM educator, I'm really cognizant of textbook costs, where textbooks can be hundreds of dollars for a book that if they wanted to purchase it, they're only going to use maybe 1 or 2 semesters. I've always tried to provide kind of an instructor copy on loan for my students. I've been doing this for years, but during the pandemic, it became obvious students just didn't have access to that anymore when they were off by themselves. And that really prompted me to start this OER project. The other side of this is that genetics kind of has this long history of being used as justification in places where it really shouldn't be used as justification. Science isn't there to back up some social fallacies that are portrayed as rooted in genetics. And so I wanted to be able to use a resource that really treated these topics with respect. Can you move to the next slide? When I started this project, I looked at a lot of different resources. These are 3 of the resources that I looked through that had a lot of what I wanted, but there were no sources out there that had everything that I wanted to include in my resource. And so I really set out to kind of integrate material from lots of different sources with what ended up being a lot of my own work as well, to stitch it all into a coherent whole. And I do want to say thank you to or acknowledge the authors, where I did use that information kind of as a starting and organizational framework for my text. One of the things I do want to emphasize, is that images played a huge role in this. Developing images from scratch is really pretty challenging. And so I found that using images from other resources was one of the most valuable parts of the remix and adaptation. Who's next?
All right, thank you so much, Mandy. Keisha, on to you.
Hello everyone, I'm back. So the one that I'm going to focus on today is the book I did on Why Do I Have to Take This Course? A Guide to General Education. This book actually falls mostly into the creation category, but the adaptation aspects of it I'll explain in just a second. But really, as most projects and research projects and writings do, it started with a problem. Which is that we redesigned our general education program in 2021 at Fitchburg State, which I'm sure many of you have gone through this process. It's not a particularly fun process. But we did a very comprehensive study of our previous curriculum. And one of those things that we really identified was that there was a lack of communication with students concerning why they have general education requirements. And the significance of general education in general. This is not unique to Fitchburg State. I've done a lot of work on this since before and since this time. And in general, we kind of are bad in higher education of talking to students about this. We tend to sort of present them gen ed as a checklist to complete. And so my question is, how can we communicate to students about general education requirements in a meaningful way? And one of the ways that I wanted to do that was that I decided to do that was through OER. The ROTEL project came at a perfect time to be able to do that. So if you could click, Julie. The equity lens that ROTEL provided was the meaningful framework that I was looking for. And I keep telling this story, but I distinctly remember thinking about the lens that I wanted to use. I had been doing a lot of workshops for student ambassadors, so working with residence assistants, orientation leaders, peer tutors. I consider them to be my front line. I train them, and then when they are talking with students, they can reach and communicate with students in a lot of different ways. And I had found through those trainings that finding a lens for them to really be able to get into it really was helpful. And so I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and it hit me at 3 o'clock in the morning, as these things usually do. The good trouble, necessary trouble framework that John Lewis um, uh, sort of coined and created that phrase, and which has become even more relevant recently because Senator Cory Booker used it as sort of his reason to stand up to filibuster in the Senate, and so you're seeing it a lot more these days. But really, what I loved about what John Lewis did in his own writings is that he really talked about what it meant and how like he considered voting and participating in the democratic process as good trouble, necessary trouble, but that it also required study. It required an understanding of different subjects, of history, of all kinds of different things, social sciences, everything, to be able to do that. And it struck me that this was a really great framework for thinking about general education and why general education is important. And so you can see down below the examples of some of the examples. So basically the book is organized by learning outcome. It has a whole introduction as to what general education is, because most students have no idea what that actually means. And then it's broken down by learning outcome, which matches Fitchburg State, which I'll talk a little bit in a bit about what that means to adaptation. But those things are usually fairly even though they might have different titles, they're fairly similar across universities. So you see false or fake information for information literacy, mathematical simulations and racial profiling for quantitative reasoning, and then you can go down the list yourself. So each one of these has an introduction to the whole concept, but then a lens of this good necessary trouble that students can then take a look at. If you would click. And this is where the writing problem came into play, is that I'm not an expert in all of the learning outcomes. I can certainly cheer them on, and I can certainly have more that I am more involved in. My father was a biologist, so at least I have some connection to some of these, but I'm not an expert in all of them. And so what do I do? So click, Julie. One of the first things was, of course, research. I mean, that is what we do, and that is certainly one of the frameworks. Second, click. Curated statements from excerpts, and you can click again, Julie, and I know you're not going to be able to read this because it's very tiny, but this is an example. I had very generous people, both in Fitchburg State and out of it, that I contacted, and every single one of them said, yes, I will write a paragraph about this particular concept. So this one is from the Diverse Perspectives Learning Outcome, where someone is, I have a professor at Fitchburg State in behavioral sciences who gave his thoughts and ideas, which was very helpful to be able to bring in a whole bunch of different experts. But then third is adaptation. So just to give an example, so you can click again. This is from part 7 from the personal wellness learning outcome. And there are some great OER books out there. This particular one that I liked is called A Guide for Successful Students, and it had some sections that were related to mental wellness and health that I was then able to take and adapt to be able to be a part of that section, which made life a lot easier. Again, whenever I'm not the expert on all of these subjects, and I did want a variety of voices and people who actually work in those fields to be able to talk about that. So it was very helpful to be able to adapt for this. All right, Julie.
All right, thank you so much, Joan, Amanda, and Keisha. I'm going to stop sharing now. Whoops, hold on. And I've got, oh, hold on. Wait a minute. There we go. Stop sharing. Okay, here we go. Okay, we have some questions that we prepared, and then we want to be able to also ask the audience to share questions. So I want to start with a question for the panelists. So what changes or adaptations were necessary in order to achieve your vision, and were there helpful tools or frameworks to assist in this process? And Mandy, why don't we start with you this time?
Sure. Well, when I got started, I realized that there was no single OER that fit what I wanted. And so I was starting with adaptation, but it kind of expanded from there. And again, in a lot of ways, it did creep into creation, given how much adaptation. I know, where's that boundary between adaptation and creation? Where do you start and end? But the organization of others' texts really served as a great starting point. And from there, I kind of cut and paste and supplemented to the point where it is largely a new text. I showed images of those three sources in my original slide. That was just a starting point. There were a whole lot more that I kind of used. But one of the things that I found was really helpful in this process is that as a scientist, there are a lot of open access journals where primary literature is published under an open access license. And I found those as a really rich and powerful source of information, both to describe, hands-on experiments that led to the conclusions I was talking about in the text, but also using images as well. And I do have a slide of this if you want to pull it up. So this is an example of kind of two mushed together sources where the top image is a cartoon image of a segment of DNA that controls expression of other genes. I don't want to get too technical about it because I know that we have tons of non-scientists in here, but the top image is kind of a cartoon image of how this is presented in a lot of textbooks. The top image is available on Wikimedia Commons. I'm glad, I like genes too. And it's been used in a lot of different contexts. But the image down below is actually taken from a open access journal, Frontiers in Immunology, and it's a scientific article that presents the cartoon-like context. It's still a cartoon, but it's more of a three-dimensional complex image. And I did end up drawing a lot of images for this. I know Min's on the call, and Min helped a lot with that too. He probably doesn't like genes as much as I do. But to use these kinds of images and that kind of data in this context is a really powerful source of information. So I wanted to kind of share how I was using those open access journals in addition to other open access textbooks.
Thanks, Mandy. Joan.
Sure. And my slide, I think, is right after Mandy's, if you want to pull that up. So for me, I just want to shout out to kind of my favorite instructional designer in the world, Jess Egan, who was working with me at Holyoke Community College, who reminded me that it's super important to start always with the learning objectives of the course. And so the adaptations to my book, you'll see in the left-hand column is the chapter ordering of the original text, and then how it was adapted for my version. And it really follows and scaffolds the learning objectives for the course. So that was my starting point, with the helpful reminder from Jess to stay focused on those objectives, to make sure that things are scaffolded and clear and transparent for students. So that was really my first step. And then wherever it was appropriate, I needed to update data to localize to Massachusetts. And it needed a little bit of updating in terms of research or current voices in the field of child and family studies and early childhood education. And I updated almost all of the images, and really took a fine-tooth comb around language that was used in the textbook to ensure that it was representing a culturally sustaining framework and a culturally sustaining lens. And in the first version, there's not a lot of student voice in it, and that's become really a big piece for me, is as I think about the next version, making sure more student voices are integrated and included as the text, as the source. And there needs a chapter on race and socioeconomic factors. Those are two chapters that need to be in this that aren't there currently. And I'd like there to be some more interactives inside of it. Those always sort of like sit for me as secondary to the text, and I wish I could get them to integrate in my workflow as together. So maybe that's the thing that I'm hoping to prioritize for my own professional development in this next version. And my media section is really out of date. I reference Friends, and I reference I don't remember. This Is Us and a couple of other shows. So I need my 22-year-old daughter to consult with me on some updated media, so that feels more relevant. Yeah, so that's mine.
You can stay there, Julie, for the next slide. I agree with everything that John and Minnie have said, and the one thing that I would particularly add, or maybe the two things, is one, really being aware of what you are wanting to add to what you're doing, what is your unique kind of perspective of what you're doing, and what doesn't have to be recreated. Where is the wheel already created? I created another book for this project that was for first year writing, and there are a ton of fantastic OER writing to first year writing textbooks out there. Mine was what my lens was and what my particular focus was, but I didn't need to recreate the wheel when it came to what, certain writing, just descriptions of how to write certain things, what types of genres are, and that sort of thing. So I think it's very important to know what you are providing and wanting to do, and what you don't need to recreate if it's already there. The second thing that I will say is, as a writing professor, I'm very concerned about, like, how do I take what they're doing and putting it into this and not be jarring. And so this is a couple of examples, like I was from that chapter from personal wellness that I was talking about before. So there's a concepts to consider section under each of the learning outcomes, and you can see this is mine, where personal wellness is the learning outcome, the word that it's actually titled that, and what actually needs to be. And then if you click, Julie, this is where it came from, was a guide for successful students I was pulling, but they were calling it health and wellness. I know this seems like a small thing, but the being able to take what others are doing and making it fit into what you're doing, and making the flow sound good, because it's not just about, grammar and all of that sort of thing. It's about not being jarring for the students when they're actually reading it, and so they're not being pulled out of things. So another example, if you click again in the same chapter, is while yeah, perfect. Nope, go back. Perfect. Is this, do you see the mine up there, which was the wellness involves feeling good in every aspect. There were certain things in every respect, and there were certain things in theirs that didn't quite match with what I was wanting to talk about, but there were some really great parts that were. And so being able to pick and choose as to what works for you and what does not, even in like a paragraph of like what you're taking out from and adapting from someone else.
Thanks so much. All right, I'm going to stop sharing again for a moment and ask my next question. So this is kind of an elephant in the room question. In the current environment, particularly in the US, there are challenges of developing and adapting learning materials that are localized or designed for equity and reaching marginalized audiences. So I'm wondering, what rewards have you seen from these efforts? Why do you see this work as important and impactful? Joan, do you want to start us out for this one?
Yeah, sure. And I have a quick little slide of just images to take a look at. So each time that I have used this textbook in my own courses, I have had a student say to me, "Thank you for the images." So these are just a quick little selection of them. These are not images that I've taken. Most of these are from Unsplash, but one of my drivers inside of this was to have images that were vibrant, but also were inclusive of anyone who would take this course, or of any child or family member that my student would encounter in their professional life. So it's super rewarding for me when a student says, "Thank you." And in particular, this image on transparenting in the section inside of my book on transparenting, I get thank yous, and I feel very humble that is true for me. And I just feel like so happy that that happens. And last week, Ryan Newton, he's a psychology instructor from I'm reading so I don't get it wrong, from the Metropolitan Community College in Omaha, Nebraska, contacted me. This was so cool. He's using this book in a parenting and family problem solving class. And his students wanted to thank me for the work and some of the text and image in this book, and also to point out some phrasing that they want to have changed. In one of my chapters, I used the term transgendered with an ED, and his students recommended that I drop the ED. And so that was like so totally awesome that the students felt empowered to contact me, and that I will adjust and update inside of this book, because they're 100% right. So it's super cool. It's really satisfying. It's also in many ways the same reason that I wonder how much longer my textbook will be used in many of the states in the US. So there's a vulnerability to that that makes me less excited than the contact that I have with students. Thanks.
Thank you, Joan. Keisha or Mandy, you want to jump in on this one? Let me stop
Go,
sharing.
Mandy, if you want me to.
You want to go, Keisha? Or
I don't care. It's up to you.
Well, I'll just chime in then and say that it's nice to be able to create materials that speak to the students in the room. Like Joan, I do want to be sensitive to some of these topics, and one of my favorite topics to look at in this text was the chapter on sex and gender, just to continue that conversation, because the biology doesn't always match the way it's presented in news articles. And so one of the chapters of my text does break down the differences between sex and gender, and how sex develops embryonically and genetically, what genes are controlling those processes, and what does it mean for a person to be intersex or transgender, and how did genetics play a role in that? And I have had students come up to me after class and say that they really enjoyed those conversations in the classroom, and it was a meaningful conversation that really spoke to them. And I think that's a really important and powerful function for OER to fill in the classroom.
Thank you.
Couldn't agree more with both what Joan and Mandy said. So I don't have a ton to add except to say yes. But it's that idea of when students see themselves in it, they see things, they're surprised, which always makes my heart break a little bit, because they shouldn't be surprised to just see themselves within the resources, but at least they are in this particular case. And I get a lot of feedback that they are surprised at how current the information is, which is something that OER can do that we can't do in other cases, which is we can add in things that are happening right now. We can do those types of things, which I think are very important as things move and shift very quickly. And I think especially the newest data on everything as things change and move. If you're still, if a book is still showing data on especially marginalized groups, if it's showing it for years back, it's not being true and representative of what's happening right now. And so I think it's really useful that OER can do this, and especially, yeah, right now it's tough. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I think that it is really important for the students to be able to still have access to that information.
All right, thank you. Continuing on our theme of education that reaches all learners, I want to pose a question that for the panelists that Wade Shoemaker asked in the chat. So could the presenters please comment on their approaches to accessibility? What were adaptation materials, or were the adapted materials already 100% accessible, and what issues did you run into? So I'm not sure who wants to take that one first.
I'd love to just share a story. I think Min might still be on the call. So Min, if you are, please feel free to jump in if you'd like to. So there is one, so accessibility of text was one of the objectives and goals for the ROTEL grant overall. And that was the publishing team, I would argue, by and large, took responsibility for making sure that our materials are accessible. And I have one infographic in my text that's a really complicated infographic, and Min called me and said, we can't write alt text for this. It's too much alt text. So let's talk about what we can do inside of this chapter to have appropriate alt text, but build support around the infographic so that it becomes accessible to all learners who are accessing this coursework, this course book. So it was a really big learning experience for me. I knew how to do alt text, but I didn't know all of the things around alt text. So it was great professionally for me. And I really appreciated Min's eye in to be able to call it out and say, here's some alternatives in ways that we can design this.
I think the other, I mean, just to tout OER for another really good important thing is that, so I've been using universal design for a very long time in my classes and building my classes around with universal design, but textbooks often are not written with that idea in mind. So to be able to take information and put it into a way that uses universal design, or at least I'm thinking about universal design, is very important. I think for our particular textbooks, I think trauma-informed pedagogy is also incredibly important from an accessibility perspective. I think it's also really important to work with the experts on this. So, like, for example, I worked with our great disability services director at that time just to touch bases and make sure, like, is this technology platform that I would like to link to, does that seem accessible? Like, what are the, I mean, I'm reading this because I do disability studies, and so I have some background, but going to the experts who understand accessibility from that technical perspective is really, really important when it comes to being able to do all of this, because we can't, again, be experts in all of the aspects that go into these projects.
Thank you. I'm going to ask another, so there's a Q&A section question from Dorina Grossu. Are there studies available about students' motivation to access OERs? And I guess I'll broaden that. So it looks like Apurva, you have a response to that. And so in addition, if there's research, also if anybody wants to share feedback that you might have seen or heard on this. So go ahead, Apurva. Oh, you're muted.
I'll let the panelists jump in first.
Can I address that?
Sure.
I will say that a lot of this is kind of in its infancy, but there's a lot of people doing this work. So I was at a conference this past weekend, and was at a session where they were talking about this kind of work coming from out of Georgia, I think. I know Massachusetts has a statewide OER board that's looking into these things too. And the preliminary data is really promising about this. At the very least, OER does not hurt student outcomes. And best case is it actually seems to help student outcomes in a lot of ways. And the kind of work that's being done almost always starts with like numbers, DFW rates, and student persistence and retention. But the open response kind of surveys of students are also pretty positive around OERs.
And I'll just add to that and note that, as Joan mentioned earlier in this session, the textbooks that were adapted or even created the creators weren't just thinking about the materials themselves, but also the pedagogy and the open educational practices that they would use to teach these materials in the classroom. I think it's worth remembering that all of the ideas and the adaptations that you've seen today are coming from maybe decades of teaching the course and seeing where do students struggle? How can their experience be improved? I think it's so evident from all three of you that you've really just been designing for that humanity, that perspective first and foremost, so that the students' needs are met, so the materials are current and representative. And I know that there is that third phase of the ROTEL project underway right now, where they are collecting student feedback. So Dorina will say, stay tuned to read more about the results of the books you're learning about today.
Thank you. All right, we just have a couple of minutes left, and so I want to pose one final question. I know this one is especially close to Keisha's heart, and it's something I think that can apply to everybody. What advice would you give to colleagues who are contemplating an adaptation or remix project or working on OER currently? So Keisha, would you start us off?
Sure, and I'll just quickly mention what I found very important while I was doing mine was to think about the fact that it might be adapted in the future. I think that while it helps to think about that while you're writing, because that's the nature of OER, is that we saw the timelines, the people are going to, it's not going to stop with us, hopefully. Hopefully people are going to look at what we're doing and then adapt it and use it in the future. And I know, for example, Framingham State is already taking my gen ed book and is working on adapting it for their purposes. But when you're thinking about writing for adapting, you really think about chapters. You really think about how the sections work. Is this going to be taken as a section that somebody else is going to use? Is it going to be a whole book that somebody is going to use? Is it going to be this part that is this going to be this image that somebody's going to take? And I think it really makes you think very carefully and clearly about what it is that you are writing and what it is that people are going to be looking at and possibly adapting in the future. So I think adaptation is great in a lot of respects, but it also I think can help tremendously in thinking about the actual writing process as to what your book looks like and what it is going to be able to do in other ways.
Thank you. Joan or Mandy or Apurva, any advice there?
I'll go next. I have two things, right? The first is that you don't have to do it all yourself. And that was like such a breath of fresh air when somebody said that to me. Like the point of adaptation is to borrow and use the work, the great work of others, and to curate resources that make sense and to use those curations in ways that are reflective and representative of your values. And so the minute somebody said that to me, I was sort of like, oh yeah, right. This is OER, of course, that is the culture, and that's important. And I think the second is to really think about kind of layers and tiers of informed consent when you're using student voice and student work. And that's really prominent for me right now as my second edition has student work in it and students are named in it, and perhaps maybe they might want their names taken off of it in the near future, depending on the climate for them. So I would say student work, really think through what does consent for them mean, and do they have the ability to say in 2 years, I want my name out, if they in some way feel that it's not appropriate to be in it anymore.
I think I would give the advice to make sure that the accessibility is built in from the beginning too. It's easier to design with accessibility in mind than it is to retrofit something that's not accessible. For me, one of the things that I kept thinking about too was even something as basic as what color schemes were chosen. Keeping in mind that colors don't look alike to everybody else. Again, geneticists speaking here. So if I did end up making my own images, I started with an accessible palette, color palette. And I'm going to give another shout out to Min, because Min was such a trooper. I am sure I gave Min and the publishing team quite a bit of challenge trying to take interactive points in the book where I'd stop and ask questions. Not all H5P is accessible, and thinking about accessibility right from the start becomes really important.
My advice is really quick, which is just start. Take that idea from your mind and just the brainstorming. And starting could look like you're just telling a colleague, hey, I'm thinking of making these changes to my syllabus, to my textbook, to my workbook. Start small and trust that the rest will come and it will fall into place.
Thank you so much. All right, we are just a little bit past time. Thanks for everyone who has stayed on with us. I'm going to put up one final slide here just to let everybody know. You can look out for a follow-up email about the webinar. We'll send out the recording and some related resources. We also do have another webinar coming up on the 22nd of April on enhancing student success using Pressbooks results. So look out. We'll have the ability to register for that for anyone who is interested. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our marvelous panelists and the tremendous work that you have done. We're privileged to be able to support you, and we so appreciate having these invaluable resources that are now part of our canon of resources, learning materials that anyone can use. So we appreciate you being here. Thanks to our audience. We appreciate your support as well. So take care. Have a great rest of your day.